Hi everybody, welcome back. Today in this lecture video I'm going to be discussing Chapter 7, the Recruitment Interview. But first I want to just give a quick overview of the three things that I'm going to accomplish in this video. So first, of course, I'm going to be talking about Chapter 7 and the most important elements that you need to know in preparation for our big employment interview project. Then the second thing, I'm going to discuss your role as the recruiter for the upcoming project and how you need to prepare for that role. Next week, we're going to be covering your role as the applicant, the person who's applying to the job. So bookmark that and we'll cover that half of it next week. This week, we're focusing just on your role as the recruiter. And then number 3, I want to give an example of how I might complete this week's homework assignment, which is the recruiter worksheet. So first, I just want to show you real quick on Canvas, this is our week 6 module. I want to point out to you right under the recruiter worksheet, I posted a list of recruitment interview question examples. I took a lot of these from the book, but then I came up with some of them on my own. And you can see that I break it down into the different categories. These are just questions that you can pull from and use and modify for your recruitment questions for this project. So I just want to point you out or point you in the direction of these. A lot of these are going to be in the slideshow presentation that I have. So I just want you to be able to follow along with your own document. So let's get started. So when you are acting as the recruiter for a job interview, there's some things that you need to be aware of legally. Primarily, you need to be aware of what's called Equal Employment Opportunity Laws, or EEO laws for short. And basically what EEO laws do is they ensure that there's no discrimination going on in the hiring and recruitment process. So for the purposes of the project that we have, you just need to know basically what categories and what types of questions you cannot ask about. If you are a person in this class who is going into HR and you plan to have a career in hiring and recruitment, I suggest studying this content a lot more thoroughly, but we'll just go over the basics for today. So first, EEO laws are concerned with effect, not intent. So in other words, you could illegally ask a question and you didn't even know it or you did not intend to ask it, but you did. So you want to be extra careful that in all of the primary questions that you prepare for this assignment, that you are not writing in any illegal questions. But the tricky part is also going to be in the probing or the follow-up questions, because a lot of those are done on the spot and in the moment. So that means during the interview interaction, you really need to prepare and think through each word that you say that you're not about to ask an illegal type of question. So you can ask about your applicant's work experiences, their training, education, skills. You can ask about conviction records. That's when they've been convicted of a crime. That's public record. You can ask about any physical attributes and personality traits that relate specifically to the job. You cannot ask about things like gender, age, race, religion, marital status, sexual orientation, physical appearance, disabilities, citizenship, place of birth, ethnic group, veteran status, military records or discharge status, and arrest records. Note that arrest records are different from conviction records because if you've just been arrested for a crime, you have not been convicted in a court of law, so you can't ask about it during an interview. However, all of these things depend on how they relate to the job. So in general, you cannot ask about any of those topics that I just mentioned unless they are essential for a position. So I'll give you an example, religion. Generally, you don't ask about religion in a job interview. It's illegal. However, if someone was applying to become a Jewish rabbi, you definitely would need to ask about that and their religious ties and religious affiliations. So there are some exceptions, and I have some examples here. So all of these questions are either going to be in the category of lawful, unlawful, or it depends. So number 1, do you go by Margaret or Peggy? That's lawful. You're just asking about their name. Number 2, I noticed that you walk with a cane. That is unlawful. You cannot point out someone's disability during an interview. Number 3, are you a U.S. citizen? No, you cannot ask that during an interview. Sometimes when you are being onboarded onto a job, they will require documents proving your citizenship, but that does not happen during the employment interview because sometimes that can be used to discriminate against people. Number 4, I see you served with special forces in Syria. Did you get hurt while in combat? That is unlawful. You cannot ask about someone's past military experience. Number 5, how fluent are you in Chinese? That would be considered lawful, especially if it relates directly to the job. If you were applying to be a Chinese interpreter, you kind of need to know how fluent the person is. Number 6, how did you lose your right eye? That is unlawful, and it doesn't relate to the duties of the job. You could ask questions such as, will you be able to perform the duties of the job, but you cannot ask specifically about disability or how something happened. That's just curiosity at that point. 7, are you planning to get married? That is unlawful. Number 8, which religious holidays do you observe? That depends. Now, for the majority of all of you, I would say do not ask this. However, as I mentioned before, in certain circumstances, it might be necessary to ask that. Then, number 9, Weinberg, is that Jewish? That is unlawful, also goes in the category of curiosity. Number 10, have you ever been arrested? I said unlawful, and then I put a question mark for depends. The only example I could maybe think of where it would be okay to ask that would be if you were applying to be a law enforcement official, a police officer, or something of that sort, and they want to know, have you ever had any run-ins with the law? But other than that, you should never, ever ask that question. Number 11, what software programs have you used? That is lawful. 12, do you drink? I said that depends. For the most part, you shouldn't really be asking about that, but then for some jobs, such as an airline pilot or anything that operates heavy machinery, it might matter to the duties of the job. Number 13, what professional organizations do you belong to? That is lawful. 14, would you have a problem with relocating? That is lawful. And 15, asked of a veteran, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? That is unlawful. So take a look at some of these examples and try to prepare your primary questions for the upcoming interview and make sure that you avoid any illegal questions being asked. Now we're going to talk about how you would open the interview as the recruiter. So when you sit down with your partner, you're going to sit down in a video conference call, which is becoming very common today in our world of technology. So there's some steps that you need to take to open up the interview when both of you are seated to face each other on camera. So number 1 is to build rapport. So you need to identify who you are, have a conversation with this person, gauge some of their interests, any commonalities that you might have, and that could be something as simple as engaging in small talk in the beginning, but rapport is built throughout the interview. So you don't just want to rapid fire move through all of your questions and not really pay attention to anything they're saying. The whole interview should be a conversation that is mutually created between the two of you. And of course, you need to orient your applicant, your partner, to the nature of the interview. So you need to give them a preview of what you're going to be talking about in the introduction of the interview. So you need to say, well, we're interviewing for XYZ job posting, and I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about your education, work experience, and how you might fit into the company. Done. That's all you need to do to orient them to the nature of the interview. Then in the introduction of the interview, your opening question, this is the first real question, the first real primary question that you have prepared. It needs to be open-ended, easy to answer, and on a specific, familiar topic. I always like to pull something from their resume for the very first question just to get them talking, to get them comfortable. Something like, I see you had an internship with this radio station. Tell me a little bit about what you did there. And they could talk about that forever. That's a very good question to open up with that just gets them started into talking about their experience. And then from there, you want to use a moderately structured interview method throughout. So that's when you have all of the primary questions planned out in front of you, and you have some probing questions planned out as well, but you have the freedom and the liberty to stray away from those primary and probing questions. If a new topic arises, you can ask a new probing question that you didn't prepare for, things like that. But you have that structure to guide you throughout. Now we need to talk about some question pitfalls that are unique to the recruitment interview. So the first is the evaluative response. And this isn't necessarily a question that you ask, but this is when you express a judgmental feeling about an answer that the applicant gives you. So an example, that wasn't a good reason to quit a job, was it? Or, wow, that sounded like a terrible place to work. So you want to remove your personal opinions and feelings out of the interview as much as possible. If they say that, if the applicant brings that opinion into the interview, then that's fair game, but you don't want to say those things because then you're going to influence the answer that the applicant gives you. Next, as we previously discussed, the EEO violation. So do you have any disabilities? Or what will you do if your husband gets transferred? So these are questions that you cannot, should not ask, and if you were in a real HR hiring situation, these are actually illegal. You could get in a lot of trouble. And then finally, we have the resume/application form question. This occurs when you ask a question that is basic that you really could have just found on their resume and they just waste time. So where did you get your degree from? You could look that up on their resume. What relevant work experience do you have? Again, you could easily see that on the resume, and at that point, you're just wasting time asking questions about, where did you get your degree and what work experience do you have? Now, you could ask questions about their education and about their work experience that give you more detail that are not on the resume, but you don't want to ask such basic questions like that. What you do want to ask are some of the traditional interviewing questions. Now, I'm going to refer you back to the document that I pointed out on Canvas, the recruitment interview question examples. All of these questions you will be able to find on that document. So I'm not going to go through and read each and every one. I'm just going to talk about the purpose of each of the categories. So traditional interview questions, these are the types of questions that you are likely to encounter in an employment interview. They are the most common, widely used questions, and they relate specifically to the duties of the job and or how the person would fit into the organization. So they have questions based on the interest in the organization, like why do you want to work for us? You should always have a good answer to that question. If you cannot specifically talk about the organization you're applying to and know some basic information about them, like the services that they provide, then you're not going to get hired there. Okay, then we have general work-related questions. So tell me about the position that has given you the most satisfaction. So asking about previous work experiences that the person has had. And then specific work-related questions. So looking at specific strategies that they might use to accomplish a certain task. How do they communicate? How do they manage their workload? And other examples. This is basically just zeroing in on a specific part of working that you want to know about. Other categories. You could ask questions about teams and teamwork. So if your partner or applicant is applying for a role that requires them to work in a group setting, you might want to plan some questions about teams and teamwork. Then education and training. Everybody in the class has to ask a question about your partner's education. So a very basic one, how has your education prepared you for this position? And then you can ask more specific questions such as any specific programs they were a part of, any projects that they think are particularly useful, anything related to their education that ties into the job posting. Then you can ask questions about career paths and goals. So these are more future oriented, and these are used to gauge a future relationship with the organization? Are you just going to work here for a year and then dip out, or do you see a real future with us and you want to grow your career here? So an example, if you join us, what would you like to be doing in 5 years? How are you going to prepare yourself for advancement in this company? Then there are performance-based questions. So what do you believe are the most important performance criteria for this job position? What are your strengths and weaknesses in terms of job performance? So that is when you are working on the job, how do you perform? So those are a list of traditional interview questions, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are just examples that you can pull from and use for your own recruitment interview as you are preparing to interview your partner in a few short weeks here. Now, we need to discuss the on-the-job questions because these are actually required of you. If you look at the assignment sheet for the employment interview and look at the rubric, you are required to have 2 of these questions. So there's 3 categories, and you need to pick 2 of these categories and have a question that relates to each of those. So there's behavior-based questions. So that relates to past experiences that specifically relate to the current position. So some examples. Tell me about an idea of yours that was implemented primarily through your efforts. How did you manage a past situation when you had to quickly adapt? Tell me about your most difficult relationship with a team member. How did you handle it? So these are asking about real situations that the person has encountered in the past on the job, and you're seeing how would they react in our work environment. So those are behavior-based questions. They're very popular and common among students in this class, so I would definitely highlight that category and come back to it. It's going to be very helpful to you. So you could pick one behavior-based question and then either a critical incident or a hypothetical question. But you cannot pick 2 behavior-based questions and have it satisfy that requirement on the rubric. You have to have 2 questions from different categories on this list. So then I'll talk a little bit about critical incident questions. So this is when you ask a question about an actual incident that is occurring or has occurred within the real organization that they're applying to. So some examples. Last year we had some issues with miscommunication between team members. How would you have handled this? Or like many organizations, we have experienced a decline in sales due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What would you suggest that we do about it? So these are real situations that the company is actually facing right now or in the past, and you want to know how, if we hired this person on, how would they handle it? So I'll give you another example. The Milwaukee Bucks just got a new basketball player that everyone is very excited about. So if I was hiring a communication specialist for the Milwaukee Bucks, I might ask, as you know, we recently just got Damian Lillard on our team. What would be your communication strategy to announce this trade deal to our fan base? And that's a real situation that they could be placed into. So the difference between critical incident questions and hypothetical is that the critical incident questions are real, they have happened, or they are happening right now. Hypothetical questions are just that. They're hypothetical, they have not yet happened, but they could happen in the future, hypothetically. So an example, suppose you are suspicious that some workers are doctoring their time cards. What would you do? Or if your company suddenly announced the closing of your facility, what would you do? If a fellow coworker accused you of lying during a meeting, how would you handle it? These examples seem kind of negative. You could do a positive hypothetical as well. Let's say you were placed in a team where you didn't really know what was going on. What are the steps that you would take to seek clarity from your team members? Something like that. So a hypothetical question, you could ask something that in theory could happen on the job, and you want to know how would this person react to it. So again, you need to have at least two of these types of questions. You could have one hypothetical and one critical incident, one hypothetical and one behavioral, just some combination of these. You need to have 2 of them in different categories. And then the final category, this is not in your book. These are just some questions that I thought could be helpful, and they're what I'm calling philosophical questions. So philosophical questions are meant to learn about more of their values, how do they approach their work, what is their philosophy towards their craft or the work that they do. So what does ethical leadership mean to you? How do you define success? What are 3 things that make a strong work environment? What does teamwork mean for you? What is your work philosophy? And you could be more specific, like what is your teaching philosophy or what is your journalistic philosophy? Basically, how do you approach your work in this area? So these are questions that are meant to get to know the person on a personal level and what do they value about their work. Then in this interview as the recruiter, you have to give information. So in other words, you could ask, what do you know about our organization? And hear your partner's responses, but in order to save time, you could just tell the applicant about things that are relevant to the matching process. So you are required to give one piece of information or one fact about the organization during this interview. So you could talk about the organization's reputation, their culture, the job position itself, and what they would be doing or what the value of this position is. You could discuss what the typical workday might look like. You could talk about advancement opportunities. So basically, it's any piece of information that is very relevant to this job interview, and I always think it's nice to give that information in the introduction of the interview. And finally, closing the interview. So there are steps that you have to take in the conclusion, and you have to prepare for it in terms of the timing. So of course, you want to maintain a positive tone throughout. You don't want to unnecessarily discourage or encourage the applicant. So in other words, you don't want to say things like, you definitely got the job, I'm very confident that you're going to get this job here, knowing that there are 5 other applicants that you have to interview moving forward. You also don't want to discourage them for any reason. So, you should really not get your hopes up about this job position because you don't know yet. They could be a very strong contender. So you just want to keep it as neutral as possible. Then you want to inform them when you will make the decision. That could be, we will contact you within a week or so to let you know about our decision and the next steps. And for everyone in the class, you need to leave time to ask them, do you have any questions for me? This is something that both of you are being graded on. So you need to allow time for them to ask questions, and then your partner needs to ask questions about the organization that then you have to answer. You need to supply your contact information and how you'll get in touch with them. And then you need to have a sincere thank you and goodbye. So with that being said, we're now going to talk about your role as the recruiter for this project specifically. So in the opening, you need to have a sincere greeting, create a dialogue, have a little bit of a conversation, some rapport building, just a friendly conversation in the beginning to get the interaction started. You can't obviously do a handshake because you're going to be on a video call. You need to be dressed in business formal or business casual attire. So I'm not a huge stickler on this, but no t-shirts, no sweatshirts, just a nice blouse, a button-up, something of that nature. You're only going to be seen from about like the waist up maybe, so just plan like a nice business formal or business casual attire on the top half of your body. And as a recruiter, you need to give a preview of the interview and the job position. So we're interviewing for this job position, and I'm going to be asking you questions about your education experience, your work history, and your how you might fit into this role. So you need to give a preview in the opening. Then you need to plan at least 8 primary questions and prioritize your top 5. So because we have a time limit on the interview, you're not going to probably get to all of your questions, so you want to have more questions planned than you actually need. So all of the questions that you plan for this interview need to be tailored to the applicant's resume and the job posting. You need 2 of the following, as I said, a behavior-based, a critical incident, or a hypothetical. Some combination, you need 2 of those. You need to share at least 1 fact about the job posting or the organization. You need to demonstrate that you read the applicant's resume thoroughly. And in the closing of the interview, there needs to be a sincere thank you for the person's time meeting with you today. You need to discuss the next steps after the interview. So we're going to review your application and we will get in touch via email within a week. And of course, you need to leave time to encourage the applicant to ask questions. So leave about a minute for that because you're both being graded on the ability to ask and answer questions at the end of the interview. So that is everything that you are being graded on in your role as the recruiter. So please review the employment interview assignment sheet to see the full rubric and see exactly what you're going to be graded on from start to finish. I'm going to go ahead and end this video because it's already 25 minutes long, and then I will start another one just to briefly discuss the recruitment worksheet and how I would go about completing it. So, bye-bye.